Chapter 17, Israel and the Philistines are in war again. And this is the famous story of David and Goliath. Now, the armies of the Philistines are camped on one side of a deep valley, and Saul and his armies are camped on the other side. And neither of them can get a strategic advantage. So there, in verse 4, there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistine named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. So this would make him over 8 feet tall, possibly 9 feet tall. He was very tall. He had a helmet of brass and a coat of mail that were very heavy. He had greaves of brass which protected his shins, a target of brass which protected his neck, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. And he had somebody to carry his shield, which was almost as large as that person. So he's quite large and very well armored. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine? And ye servants to Saul, choose you a man for you and let him come down. And so he's recommending, because they're at an impasse, that two individuals fight, and the winner takes all. If ye be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then ye shall be our servants and serve us. And then he says, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we might fight. And Saul, now remember, Saul was head and shoulders taller than everybody, but Goliath was significantly taller than even Saul. So they're dismayed and greatly afraid. Then you know the story. David's father sends him to check on the boys and bring him some food. And the men of Israel say, Have you seen this man that has come up? They're speaking to David. Surely to defy Israel he has come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to a man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David says to Saul, Let no man's heart fail them. Thy servant, meaning him, meaning David, will go and fight with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said, The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said, Go, and the Lord be with thee. He took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in his shepherd's bag. And then he went to fight with the Philistine. When the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of fair countenance, a pretty boy. So Goliath is a warrior, probably has lots of scars, and here comes this young, pretty guy to fight him. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Verse 45 is very famous, where David says to him, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And verse 47, For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So Goliath comes towards him. David runs towards Goliath, puts his hand in his bag, takes out a stone, and slings it, and hits Goliath right in the forehead, and he falls down. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. This is verse 50. Smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, took out his sword, and drew it out of the sheath, and slew him and cut off his head. So then the Philistines, when they see it, they run. For chapter 18. Here we learn a little bit more about Jonathan, and that Saul sets David as a general over the army. So he takes him into his household. It came to pass that when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of the cities, singing and dancing, to meet the king. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more than the kingdom? So he becomes very jealous. He continues his spiral downhill. Remember, Saul started off so humble and so willing to obey. It reminds me of that saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So Saul has let things get to him. Verse 14, And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. So in Samuel 19, we find that Saul tries to kill David out of jealousy, and his son Jonathan warns David. And then David has an incident where Saul is chasing him and trying to kill him, and his men are hungry and fleeing. They are fed holy bread by the priests, and then they flee to the Philistine area and hide in a cave. Then Saul kills the priests who helped David in chapter 22. Chapter 23, David saves one of the cities of Israel that borders on the Philistine area. Saul finds out he's there and pursues him, and David again has an opportunity to kill him but doesn't. So here we have just a graphic of Saul searching for David, happened to shelter in the same cave, only David's deeper in the cave, and he sees the king there, and he comes and cuts off the hem of his garment while he's sleeping. And then in the morning, when they've escaped, he yells across the valley that he could have killed them, and here's the proof, what I cut off from you, from the bottom of your garment, but I did not kill you, because you are the Lord's anointed. Then we get into chapter 25. Samuel the prophet dies, and we have an incident between David and Nabal. David is hiding from Saul, who continually seeks him, and he's in the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man there whose possessions were in Carmel and were very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. The name of this man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish. So churlish is not really a word that we use very often anymore in English. I went back to the Hebrew, where it means cruel, grievous, hard-hearted, impudent, obstinate, stiff-necked. And this man is very rude to David's men who are hiding in the area where Nabal keeps all of his flocks. And David's been very particular to tell them not to touch anything that's not theirs. But after he hears the report, how rude he was to his men, he says, Gird up every one their sword. He had about 400 men that went up to go against this rude fellow, and left 200 to guard their stuff. One of the servants of Abigail tells her that David is coming, that he sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute her husband, and he acted very poorly towards them. Verse 17, Now therefore no one consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial. Now remember, we talked about this, and I called him a bozo. The actual term means worthless, the quality of being useless, good for nothing. So I guess that is a bozo. Verse 18, Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves, 2 bottles of wine, 5 sheep already dressed and ready to eat, and 5 measures of grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and put them on donkeys, and said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. So she takes all of these supplies to David. She falls down on her face before him and says, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be. So she's taking responsibility for what her bozo husband did. Let not, my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal. But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young man of my Lord, whom thou didst send. So she's making a rather dramatic apology. And David says to her, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to me. Blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and avenging myself with mine own hand. For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst haste and come to meet me. Surely there had not been left unto Nabal by the morning. And then he uses an idiom that says he would have killed all the men. It came to pass that after 10 days the Lord smote Nabal, and he dies. And 39 is very interesting. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord that hath pleaded the case of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. But he knew a good thing when he saw one, and he sent and communed with Abigail, and took her to him to wife. She's a good woman. Then we have another incident where David could kill Saul. Saul continues to look for him to try to kill him, and he stops his servant from doing it. So he spares his life again in 26 and 27. He runs to live with the Philistines. In 28, Saul consults with a sorceress. Now remember, he used to have the Spirit of the Lord, but he lost it. In 29, the war continues, and David's going to fight with the Philistines, but they reject him. Then David's wives are captured by the Amalekites and taken away, so David has to go and rescue them. Then in 31, Saul dies. Let's just briefly cover what happens in 28. Saul inquires of the witch of Endor for revelation because he wants to know what's going to happen with the Philistines. She foretells his death and the death of his sons and the defeat of Israel by the Philistines. From the seminary manual, this is actually quoting Joseph Fielding Smith, despite what she said, it is not possible for a person like this woman to be able to summon the spirits of the Lord's departed servants. She either pretended to see Samuel or was under the influence of evil powers. In Samuel 31, we find the Philistines again at war. The Israelites are losing, and then in verse 3, the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sorely wounded of the archers. And so rather than be captured, he asks his servant to kill him. He won't do it because he's the anointed of the Lord. And so Saul falls upon his sword and kills himself. I just want to talk a little bit about the structure of 1st and 2nd Samuel. Originally, in Hebrew, it was all one big book. But with the translation into Greek, the Septuagint, that happened about 200 years BC, much of the world at that time had adopted Greek because Alexander the Great in 330 had gone through and conquered most of the area and turned them into Greek speaking. The problem with Greek as compared to Hebrew is you have to add in all the vowels and all the punctuation, which made the scriptures substantially longer, so they divided it into two in order that it would accommodate the papyrus scrolls. Otherwise, it was just too large. Just going to skip through the first part. So in chapter 1, David hears about the death of Saul and Jonathan, and he laments for them. He becomes anointed the king. In chapter 2, there's a rival king that's also set up. The rival king is one of the sons of Saul. So we have David, who's the king of Judah in that area, and then Saul's son, who's the king of the northern part for a short time. In 3 and 4, we have the whole controversy with Abner, and then the king of the north is killed. Here, David is anointed the king of all of Israel. When the Philistines hear that David is the king, they come up to attack because they figure it's a great time to attack when the new king is being put in place. David inquires of the Lord what he should do, and the Lord tells him that he will deliver the Philistines into his hand. David does defeat the Philistines, and they run away so quickly they leave behind all of their images and their gods. And so David and his men in verse 21 burn them. Then in verse 22, they come up to battle again. This time when David inquires of the Lord if he should go up or not, the Lord says, well, the King James Version says, fetch a compass behind them. That means go around, and they're supposed to hide over by the mulberry trees. And when they hear the wind and the treetops, they're then allowed to attack. And when they do, they beat the Philistines yet again. So David now takes the ark to the city of David, and then we get into the whole story of Uzzah. He moves the ark into Jerusalem after cleaning it out from the Jebusites. As they're moving towards Jerusalem, they're crossing a threshing floor. The cart jostles the ark, And a man named Uzzah puts forth his hand to steady it, and the anger of the Lord is kindled against Uzzah. This is verse 7. And God smites him for his error, and he dies instantly. Now that seems pretty harsh for us, but from the Old Testament Institute Manual we read the following. The Ark of the Covenant was a sacred vessel that housed some of the holiest objects in Israel's history. To touch the Ark or its contents was strictly forbidden by the Lord. Only authorized Levites, and they only under certain specified conditions, could handle the sacred instruments. Uzzah may have exhibited some bold presumption when he sought to touch that which God had forbidden to be touched. Even if Uzzah's intention was simply to keep the ark from falling, it should be remembered that God was fully capable of steadying his own ark had he wished to do so. While much of the story is not known, it's an excellent example that the commands of the Lord are sacred and must be observed precisely as the Lord decreed. From Neil A. Maxwell, we have the following. Some may reason that Uzzah was only trying, though mistakenly, to help out. But given the numerous times the Lord had saved and spared Israel, including the high drama of the Red Sea, out of the manna from heaven, surely he, the Lord, knew how to keep the ark balanced. Chapter 7. David here offers to build a house for the Lord. He's sitting in his house, and he turns to Nathan the prophet. This is verse 2. See now I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwelleth within curtains. He's concerned that his house where he lives is better than the Lord's. So Nathan says, okay, that's a good thought. Let's build a house to the Lord. But later that night, the word of the Lord comes to Nathan saying, and in verse 5, Go and tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, shalt thou build a house for me to dwell in? And then he goes on to explain, this is verse 12, When thy days be fulfilled, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers. I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He's speaking here of Solomon. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. We don't learn until later in First Chronicles, but I put that up for you today. That explains why. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Thou hast shed blood abundantly, and hast made great wars. Thou shalt not build a house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. David was a great general, and he expanded the land quite significantly. And so the Lord is just saying, no, it's not right that you build a house.